They weren't just taken. They were erased. Their names, their faces, their stories, buried deeper than any grave you'll find on this cursed land. And if you think that's just some Kentucky ghost tale, then you've already fallen into the trap. Because what happened here was no accident. It was a message. This story begins where most history ends, in silence. In the summer of 1877, deep in the limestone belly of Kentucky, 43 workers vanished from the Beaumont tobacco plantation overnight. Men, women, and children, gone without a scream, without a struggle, without a trace. And the strangest part, no one seemed surprised. Not the sheriff, not the magistrate, not the neighboring plantation owners who watched Jeremiah Beaumont's success with clenched fists and empty ledgers. The official record says those workers broke their contracts and fled. Fled where? No one could say. No witnesses, no sightings, no bodies. Just empty cabins, untouched pay, and a field of tobacco left half-harvested. The season's most profitable moment, abandoned mid-task. But hidden inside the rotting walls of the Beaumont manor, a set of letters, sealed and hidden for over 40 years, would tell a darker tale. Not of escape, but of extermination. Not a disappearance, but a cleansing. The truth was never meant to surface, because this plantation wasn't just a farm. It was a fault line, where race, labor, and post-war reconstruction clashed violently with the old Southern power elite. A place where integration was treated like heresy, where success built on equality drew death like blood in water. And when you dig beneath the red Kentucky soil, especially where the tobacco grows tallest, you don't just find roots, you find bones. You're about to descend into a truth older than any textbook, more dangerous than any ghost story. Because what happened at Beaumont wasn't just a crime, it was a ritual, and you were never supposed to know. They say tobacco made Kentucky rich, but the truth is it made certain men gods and fed them with silence. In 1877, Jeremiah Beaumont thought he could challenge that order. He thought he could build something honest. He was wrong. The Beaumont plantation had survived war, emancipation, and economic collapse. But what it could not survive was attention, and by that fateful summer, it had drawn too much of it. Beaumont's workforce was an anomaly in the post-slavery South. Black freedmen, Irish immigrants, poor Appalachian whites, all working side by side for equal pay, protected housing, and literacy programs. In public, Jeremiah was hailed as a visionary, but behind closed doors, his fellow landowners spat his name like poison. Because in their world, unity was rebellion, and rebellion had to be crushed. 3 months before the disappearances, Beaumont began receiving unsigned letters sealed with black wax. Each warned him to dissolve the workforce, to stop mixing bloodlines, to stop paying undeserved wages. At first, he laughed, but laughter turned to silence when a stable boy was found hanging from a tree near the chapel. No one reported it, no one investigated, because by then, the Brotherhood had already arrived. They weren't officially recognized, no names, no records, just rumors of a clandestine alliance of magistrates, sheriffs, preachers, and bankers. Their goal, preserve the natural order by any means necessary, and Beaumont's plantation had become their proving ground. On July the 12th, 2 weeks before the vanishing, witnesses reported strange men riding the perimeter of the plantation at dusk, silent, watching, not locals, not buyers, not lawmen. One worker described them in a letter. 3 men on horseback, dressed in Sunday black, eyes covered by wide-brim hats. They didn't speak, they didn't smile, they just watched us. And still, Beaumont P. rest forward. He increased wages, expanded cabins, ordered new books for the schoolhouse. He believed in what he built, believed in progress. But in Kentucky, belief was gasoline, and someone had already struck the match. Understand this. The 43 didn't just vanish. They were erased with surgical precision, erased by men who understood that control isn't held through chains or whips anymore. It's held through silence, shame, and shadow. You're not hearing this on the History Channel. You're hearing it here, because the deeper we go, the more obvious it becomes. This wasn't just an isolated event. You need to understand something before we go further. This wasn't about land. This wasn't about money. This was about control. In the months leading up to the disappearance, the Beaumont plantation had become more than a tobacco farm. It had become a symbol, a threat, not just to nearby plantation owners, but to an entire system built on hierarchy, secrecy, and inherited dominance. Because what Jeremiah built, an integrated workforce paid in gold, educated, housed, and treated with dignity, was living proof that the old ways were dying, and dying systems don't go quietly. That summer, the economy was failing, Reconstruction was collapsing, and across Kentucky, whispers of a new underground movement were spreading. The Kentucky Brotherhood, men who wore no uniforms, carried no flags, but held court in church basements and lodge halls. They didn't burn crosses. They bought judges. They threatened with smiles. And they rewrote records before ink dried. Jeremiah had heard of them, thought they were just stories. He didn't believe they'd touch him, not with the law on his side, not with contracts signed and wages documented. But contracts mean nothing to men who own the courthouse. In early July, Jeremiah wrote a final letter to the governor, begging for protection. He knew something was coming. He mentioned masked riders near the East Fields, threatening notes left on his desk, a black worker's dog found gutted in the vegetable garden. No response came. And on July 23rd, the final warning arrived, not as a letter, but as a fire. At 2 a.m., the small schoolhouse behind the cabins went up in flames. The children's books he had ordered, the very symbols of literacy and progress, burned to ash in less than an hour. Local firemen never arrived. No report was filed, just another lightning strike in the summer night, they said. But the next morning, the workers still show up. They still cut the tobacco. They still sang, still sweated, still believed the harvest could save them, and that's what sealed their fate. Because men like Jeremiah were dangerous, not when they failed, but when they proved the lie. When they proved you didn't need fear to create order. When they showed that unity across race and class could work. That kind of truth is lethal to an empire built on division. And someone decided to bury that truth. In the deepest soil of Kentucky. July 23rd, 1877, the final day. It began with sunlight, sweat, and the rhythm of harvest, just like every day before. But by sundown, 43 people would vanish from the face of the earth. They woke early, before the sun, as they always did. Samuel Rutledge, the former slave-turned-field supervisor, assigned each team their tasks with precision. The eastern fields were thick with prime tobacco, broad golden-green leaves shimmering with dew, promising record profits. The workers moved with purpose, unaware they were walking into history's most calculated silence. By mid-morning, everything felt too normal. That's the first clue. Martha Caldwell was overheard humming while hanging clothes. Patrick O'Sullivan sang Irish ballads while stacking bales. Children ran between the rows, laughing, unaware that they were being watched. Because they were being watched. Hidden just beyond the tree line, there were figures, not specters, not shadows, men, armed, silent, dressed not as criminals, but as gentlemen. That detail matters, because when power comes for you, it wears a suit. At noon, the plantation bell rang. Cornbread, buttermilk, salt pork. They gathered in the shade of the oaks near the general store. 43 men, women, and children sharing stories, dreams, and the belief that tomorrow would be better. No one knew it was already too late. That evening, wages were paid. Every worker accounted for, as recorded by Thomas Vance in the ledger. But here's the question no one asks. Why was the ledger still on the table the next morning? Why would 43 people vanish without taking a single dollar? Because they didn't leave. They were taken. And somewhere between the sunset and the dawn, the order was given. Here's what the recovered soil samples suggest. Just west of the main field, near the limestone ridge, was a patch of earth unnaturally disturbed. Soil compacted, mineral lev, else shifted, Agricultural scientists say it's consistent with mass burial, though no bodies were ever recovered, because it wasn't just murder, it was erasure, the kind that takes planning, the kind that requires silence across multiple institutions. You don't cover up a mass disappearance without help from the law, the press, the church. And they got that help, because these 43 weren't just victims, they were proof. Proof that dignity can exist without domination. And for those in power, that is the most dangerous proof of all. By the time the sun rose on July 24, 1877, the Beaumont plantation was no longer a place of labor. It was a crime scene wrapped in quiet. But if you had been there, if you'd stood in the center of those abandoned cabins, you wouldn't have heard screaming. You wouldn't have smelled blood. You wouldn't have seen signs of struggle. You'd see stillness. Coffee still warm in tin mugs. Beds unmade, but not disturbed. Letters, half-written, dresses folded neatly on chairs, boots by the door, ready for another day in the fields. It was as if 43 lives had simply evaporated. That was the genius of it. Not a massacre, a cleansing, the kind of vanishing that leaves no witnesses, no suspects, no graves to mourn. Just questions, and institutions ready with answers before anyone thinks to ask. Sheriff Elias Denton arrived 3 hours after Jeremiah Beaumont sent for him. He walked through the rows of empty cabins without saying a word. His deputies took no notes. They made no sketches. And when Jeremiah began pointing out the missing valuables, the untouched wages, the family heirlooms, the gold coins hidden under floorboards, Denton stopped him cold. He said, "They fled, Mr. Beaumont. You've been deserted." And just like that, the narrative was born. It didn't matter that there were no footprints on the northern roads. It didn't matter that the food was still warm. It didn't matter that no one in the surrounding towns had seen 43 people walking, riding, or begging for help. The story was already decided. They left. Case closed. But here's what they didn't expect. Jeremiah didn't let it go. He hired his own search party, rode to Louisville and paid the Pinkertons in cash, brought in field trackers, cartographers, even a geologist to test soil where the crops had grown tallest. What they found disturbed them. Ash mixed with bone dust, trace remnants of sulfur, signs of night-time activity in the southern ravine. But before any of it could be made public, Magistrate Edmund Hartwell intervened. He delivered a court order, shut the investigation down, declared the missing workers fugitives, and sealed the remaining files. Why? For the good of Bourbon County. What do you call it when the law itself becomes the mask? You call it what it is. Institutional complicity. And once you see that mask, you can't unsee it. There's something you need to understand about Kentucky in 1877. Justice wasn't blind. It was selectively deaf, especially when money whispered in its ear. 3 days after the disappearance, Jeremiah Beaumont stood alone in the center of his plantation. 43 lives gone. No graves, no justice, no headlines. The fields still swayed in the wind, as if nothing had happened. But he knew something had shifted beneath the soil. What followed next was surgical. Local newspapers printed a brief, "Workers abandon Beaumont farm amid wage disputes." No mention of missing women, no mention of children, no mention of the burned schoolhouse or the midnight riders. Just a carefully planted lie, and it came from the top. The Bourbon County Herald was owned by Cyrus Denton, brother to Sheriff Elias Denton, and Cyrus didn't print stories, he buried them, for a price. His job wasn't to report truth, it was to sculpt reality. Beaumont wrote letters, sent telegrams, pleaded with senators, pastors, lawyers, anyone who would listen. But no one responded, because no one dared. You see, the Kentucky Brotherhood wasn't a myth, it was a mechanism. They didn't need to silence Jeremiah, they just needed to isolate him. Suddenly, his credit lines were frozen. His tobacco shipments delayed. The schoolhouse was denied permits to rebuild, and when he tried to host a public forum, the church doors were mysteriously locked. He wasn't arrested. He wasn't attacked. He was disappeared in plain sight. This is how power maintains itself, not always through violence, but through erasure, discredit, and social suffocation. Meanwhile, the surrounding plantations flourished. 2 months later, land records show that a portion of Beaumont's western field was quietly sold, under pressure, to a local magnate named Howard Cresswell, a known donor to the state court, a man rumored to host brotherhood meetings beneath his tobacco barns. That land had been the site of Jeremiah's planned workers' chapel. Now it was gone, and so was the vision. And still, Jeremiah fought, alone, haunted, penniless, but convinced the truth had to be preserved. He wrote everything down, bound it in leather, buried it beneath a sycamore tree near the ravine. That journal was recovered in 1924 and sealed again until 1971. Ask yourself, what truth was so dangerous that it stayed hidden for nearly a century? The Kentucky Brotherhood didn't wear robes. They didn't chant. They didn't need torches. Their fire was subtler, institutional, financial, generational. Founded in 1866, just 1 year after the Civil War, the Brotherhood was born not from loss, but from fear. Fear that the South's old grip on power was slipping. Fear that the enslaved would rise not with guns, but with literacy, ownership, and dignity. They called themselves guardians of the Southern inheritance. But they weren't protecting the land. They were protecting the illusion that control must come through bloodlines, that hierarchy was sacred, and that those who stepped outside of it had to vanish. By 1877, the Brotherhood had infiltrated every layer of Kentucky life. Judges, bankers, doctors, pastors. You could eat beside a member, shake their hand, and never know the decisions they were making behind closed doors. And Jeremiah Beaumont threatened that order, not because he was radical, but because he made justice look practical, because he turned a tobacco plantation into a working-class experiment in equity, and it worked. Let me tell you about the Ravine Ledger. It wasn't supposed to exist. It was found in 1971, hidden inside a hollowed-out beam in the old Beaumont chapel ruins, scorched at the edges, pages torn, but still legible. It contained names, dates, payments, and one section titled Sanctioned Removals, 43 names. Next to each, the initials of 3 Brotherhood members. Each line had a date and a code, SRD 1977-23, CCOM P null. Historians later decoded these to mean Sanctioned Removal Directive, Cleansing Committee, and Property Nullified. This wasn't a spontaneous uprising, it was authorized. A boardroom execution disguised as desertion. The chilling part? 2 of those initials matched signatures on church donation records. These weren't fringe lunatics, they were deacons. And just like that, the Brotherhood's mask cracked. They weren't fighting for tradition, they were eliminating alternatives. Because once you prove that equality works in the field, you prove it can work in the courtroom, in the bank, in the state house. And that, to them, was treason. The 43 were not rebels, they were simply free. And freedom, in 1877 Kentucky, was the one thing the old guard could never afford. Half a mile from the western ridge of the Beaumont plantation, buried behind a line of split-cedar fencing and nearly erased by overgrowth, stood a 2-story clapboard building. Locals called it Whisper House. It never appeared on maps. It wasn't on the Beaumont ledger, but it was real. Built in 1869, it was supposedly a rest lodge for traveling traders, but according to recently uncovered railway manifests and 2 anonymous accounts from 1903, Whisper House was something far more sinister, a processing station, not for goods, for people. Inside, the house had no beds, no kitchen, no family photos or hearth. What it had, according to those who entered it and lived, was a basement made of black brick, a dozen shackles bolted to the wall, and a drain in the center of the floor. The 1903 testimonies came from a former railroad porter and a freedwoman named Hester Vines. She'd worked as a laundress at a nearby depot. One night, she claimed, she saw a convoy of 5 wagons arrive at Whisper House, escorted by men in black coats with no badges. Inside those wagons, Bound men, women, and children, gagged, some bleeding, all silent. And here's what makes her testimony impossible to ignore. The date she remembered, July 23, 1877, the same night the 43 disappeared. She told no one at the time, because in 1877, the cost of telling the truth was your life. It wasn't until she was in her 60s, dying of pneumonia, that she confessed to a traveling pastor, who, by sheer providence, had once known Jeremiah Beaumont as a boy. Her words were recorded, sealed, and only surfaced when that pastor's journal was digitized in 2004. Here's the chilling part. In her confession, she described the smell. Not smoke, not blood, but lime. Quicklime. Used in large quantities, it dissolves organic matter fast. Whisper House wasn't a shelter, it was a solution. The Brotherhood didn't just want these people gone. They wanted them untraceable, and the basement never officially excavated, because the land now belongs to a private foundation, one still chaired by descendants of the Cresswell family. Ask yourself, why would a charitable trust fight 5 court orders to stop a dig in a vacant historical property? Because that basement holds more than secrets. It holds proof. They always say, follow the money, but they never warn you what you'll find when you do. In 1937, during renovations of a Cresswell family estate in Lexington, a rusted strongbox was discovered behind a false wall in the wine cellar. It was dismissed as junk until a descendant of the estate's steward opened it in secret. Inside, a leather pouch, several wax-sealed letters, and a thick journal bound in dull, tarnished silver thread. Historians call it the Silver Ledger, but that's not what the cover says. It reads, CFS, Register, Class 4, Property Exceptional Expenditures, CFS, Cresswell Financial Syndicate. A private lending circle composed of tobacco barons, state judges, and railroad tycoons, all Brotherhood men. This wasn't a ledger of crops. This was a book of human elimination, and the payments made to ensure it. Every page told a story, but one entry stood out. July 28, 1877. Directive fulfilled, parcel number 43. Expense, 1,720 silver. Not to be itemized. All involved absolved under oath clause. Parcel 43. Not workers, not families, not even names. Just a number. They were catalogued like livestock, erased with the cold precision of commerce. Next to that entry were 4 initials, EDCDHC and EH Elias Denton. The sheriff. Cyrus Denton. The newspaper man. Howard Cresswell. The buyer of Beaumont land. Edmund Hartwell. The magistrate who shut down the investigation. All present, all paid, all protected. But the Silver Ledger didn't just record the killings. It documented who profited after. In the months following the directive-fulfilled entry, sudden investments appeared. Cresswell purchased 2 new tobacco warehouses using untraceable cash. Denton's family opened a second printing press. Hartwell's nephew was appointed to the state appeals court. The Brotherhood's influence doubled across county lines. That's 2. He secret nobody teaches in history class. Power cleans up after itself, not with bleach, with legitimacy, with titles, with philanthropy. It wasn't just murder. It was conversion, lives turned into wealth, bones into banknotes, grief into generational control. And that ledger, it mysteriously disappeared from the Historical Society in 1981. All that remains are 2 black and white photos, watermarked and archived anonymously. You're not supposed to know this, but now you do. There's a place behind the old Beaumont estate they don't put on maps. Locals call it the Ravine. Others call it Dead Man's Hollow, but Jeremiah Beaumont had a different name for it, the Mouth That Never Closed. It's a natural trench, 40 feet deep, flanked by twisted cedar and black sycamores. In summer, the vines choke its edges. In winter, the wind howls through it like a choir of the damned. But what's buried beneath that soil is more than roots. It's resistance. After the 43 vanished, Jeremiah stopped trying to fight the Brotherhood in public. He knew the system was rigged, so he turned to the land itself. According to his recovered journal, unearthed by a Louisville historian in 1924 and kept hidden by his granddaughter until her death in 1993, Jeremiah returned to the ravine every night for 43 nights. He wasn't looking for closure. He was planting markers, not headstones, not crosses, codes. Each night, he carved a symbol into the bark of a tree, different shapes, some matching runes from African tribal dialects, others resembling slave-brand countermarks, and some so complex they've never been translated. Each one corresponded to a name, a face, a soul. He didn't just want them remembered, he wanted them mapped, encoded into the land like ancient burial rites. In 1978, a local geology student named Ronald Tubb discovered something remarkable. He wasn't looking for history, he was tracking magnetic interference. His equipment spiked in the ravine. The soil in several places was found to contain unusual concentrations of iron arranged in symmetrical rows. Later excavations, done quietly with no press, unearthed shackles, burned cloth, and a child's tin rattle buried less than 2 feet beneath the moss. It wasn't a hollow. It was a field grave. The Brotherhood never thought anyone would find it because the bodies weren't buried vertical. They were stacked, layer by layer, then covered in limestone and ash to speed decomposition, a method used in cattle culling, efficient, cold, final, but the soil never forgot, and neither did the trees. Some still bear the marks Jeremiah carved. You can see them if you visit, though most locals won't go near after sundown. They say the air changes, that you can hear whispers in the wind, not screams. Whispers, as if the earth itself is trying to confess. The official story? No human remains found, but the earth says otherwise. His name was Walter Hemsley, a historian, linguist, and Civil War archivist out of Nashville. He wasn't a sensationalist, not a rebel, just a quiet man obsessed with what he called holes in the timeline. In 1968, after decades of combing through plantation records, shipment logs, Brotherhood correspondences, and oral accounts from elders around Bourbon and Christian counties, Hemsley announced a groundbreaking publication, The Culling at Beaumont Hollow, a case for the 43. He'd traced the names, not all, but enough. He connected the ravine grave, the whisper house, and the silver ledger. He had scanned testimonies, financial anomalies, and even interviews from descendants of plantation overseers who'd turned remorseful in their final years. And then, 3 days before the book's release, Hemsley vanished. Not a disappearance in theory, a literal one. July 3rd, 1969. His car was found parked on a rural road outside Paducah. Doors locked, engine cold. Inside, his hat, glasses, and a cassette tape labeled Final Edits. But Walter Hemsley, gone. No forced entry, no ransom, no signs of struggle, no body ever found. The publisher received a typed letter the next morning, unsigned, requesting all remaining manuscript copies be destroyed. Legal pressure followed, swift, aggressive, and from a law firm with Brotherhood ties. They complied. Only one galley copy is known to exist today, smuggled out by a sympathetic editor who refused to let it die. It now resides in a private archive in Montreal, anonymously donated and accessed only twice since 1972. The tape left in Hemsley's car. It was leaked in 1984 by a university janitor who made a duplicate before authorities seized it. The contents? Walter's voice, calm, deliberate, trembling only when he read the list of names. Near the end, he says, "If you're hearing this, then I'm already considered missing or dead. I am not suicidal. I have not run, but I know what I've found. The Brotherhood still moves beneath polished shoes and velvet chairs. The Beaumont 43 were not forgotten. They were erased. I won't let them be erased again." And then, chilling silence, followed by the sound of a door creaking, and a voice, unintelligible, low, male, just one word. "Enough." Then static, Some call it folklore. But why did every known copy of Hemsley's work disappear within a week? Why was his house burned to the ground 2 months later, with the case ruled an electrical accident, despite no power ever installed in the cabin? Because Hemsley got too close. He did what the Brotherhood feared most. He told the truth in full sentences. 5 miles north of the Beaumont estate, buried beneath overgrowth and time, lie the ruins of a chapel, its stone bones scorched and broken, forgotten by man but not by history. Locals call it Hell's Pulpit, but once it was known as St. Jericho's Chapel, built in 1831 by enslaved hands, stone by stone, under moonlight and whip. It was never listed in county records, never registered with the Baptist Convention. Because it wasn't made for worship, it was made for control. At first glance, it looked like any modest rural chapel. One narrow aisle, crude pews, a pulpit raised on river rock. But what archaeologists found beneath it in 1991 shattered every idea of what this place really was. A trapdoor, hidden beneath the pulpit floorboards, opened into a cramped, torch-burned chamber, walls scorched black, symbols etched in bone. Not carved, scratched, nails, teeth, broken glass. The marks, they weren't decorative, they were desperate. Dozens of spirals, intersecting triangles and eye motifs, the same symbols found in Brotherhood correspondence, plantation ledgers, and tobacco shipping crates from the 1870s. The message was clear: this was a place of ritual binding. According to notes left by Dr. Laurel Ennis, the archaeologist who led the excavation, the subchapel bore evidence of repeated human confinement. Scraps of fabric, a rusted collar chain, and dried residue later tested as a mix of animal blood, human urine, and limestone dust. But the most damning artifact: a stone altar at the center, no larger than a child's crib, stained permanently red. Beneath it, buried in a sealed iron box, they found a Brotherhood charter, dated 1829, signed not by politicians or clergy, but by 6 tobacco magnates, 2 judges, and 1 unnamed spiritual custodian. The final line read, "Blood binds prosperity, memory must be managed, the mouth must never hunger again, the mouth." Just like what Jeremiah Beaumont called the ravine. Coincidence? Or were they feeding something deeper than greed? Dr. Ennis's findings were never published. 3 weeks after the discovery, the ruins were suddenly declared unstable and bulldozed by county order. She resigned the next day and vanished from public life. Her private notes now circulate underground forums and truth-seeker channels, but no mainstream university will acknowledge them. The land was sold 6 months later to a Brotherhood-affiliated shell company. They planted soybeans over the site. Because if you bury horror beneath crops, they think no one will notice. But we noticed. Her name was Martha Ellington, though the plantation ledger referred to her only as No. 12 kitchen help. But she was far more than that. She was the only known survivor of the Beaumont 43. And for over 40 years, she never uttered a word of what happened that night. Not a word. Not to her children, not to her preacher, not even on her deathbed. But she wrote. And what she wrote changed everything. Born into bondage in 1851, Martha was just 26 when the massacre at Beaumont took place. She'd been promoted by Jeremiah Beaumont himself, a gesture radical at the time. She served as the head cook, ran literacy circles at night, and acted as a kind of mother to the younger workers, especially the orphans. Her loyalty was unshakable. And then, one humid night in late July, she vanished with the rest of them. But 2 weeks later, she reappeared, battered, silent, barefoot, knocking on the door of a freedmen's church in Lexington, 100 miles away. She had walked the entire distance, her feet torn open, her eyes glassed over, and her lips trembling but sealed. When asked what happened, she simply mouthed, "They fed the soil." Then she wept, and never spoke of it again. But in 1909, 7 years after her death, her great-granddaughter found something beneath the floorboards of her cabin, a wooden lockbox, sealed tight and wrapped in linen marked with hand-drawn sigils. Inside, a diary, written in a blend of phonetic English, Gullah, and an unknown pictographic code that took historians decades to decode. The entries weren't dated, but they told a story, not just of horror, but of ritual, of forced silence, of how each of the 43 was marked with a burned handprint and made to kneel before an altar in the ravine. But it was entry 43 that shook the soul. I was spared not from mercy, but from memory. They said one must carry the silence. I carry it now, not in voice, in K. If you find this, beware the ones in black hats and clean nails. They eat with silver but drink from our shadows. She listed names, described symbols, identified 3 brotherhood families who still hold political power in Kentucky today. One page had a handprint in blood. Under it, he still watches. The mouth is not full. Her great-granddaughter tried to donate the diary to a museum. It was stolen from her home 2 days later. She died in a fire the same night. The diary resurfaced in fragments, passed among collectors, then researchers, now whistleblowers. Pages leaked online are constantly scrubbed from the web. Forums that host them vanish overnight. Because what Martha wrote didn't just document the past. It named the present. He wears a flag on his lapel, quotes scripture in speeches, and shakes hands with war veterans like he was born in the trenches. Senator Roy L. Ashcroft III, a name that commands reverence in Kentucky, a legacy politician praised for family values and unshakable patriotism, but behind the smiles, beneath the tailored suits, lies a bloodline soaked in shadows, a direct descendant of Jeremiah Beaumont's inner circle. You heard that right. Ashcroft is not just related to the Beaumont legacy, he is its heir. His great-great-grandfather, Thomas Ashcroft, was Jeremiah's personal accountant and spiritual liaison, responsible for organizing the financial rituals tied to the harvests and the brotherhood's ceremonial offerings. He kept a separate ledger, one not found in any museum, but leaked in 2003 by a dying archivist. That document, known as the Silver Ledger, revealed that Ashcroft handled not only plantation expenses, but donations to brotherhood fronts, masquerading as churches, Masonic lodges, and healing societies. But it gets darker. The ledger recorded a payment from the brotherhood to the Ashcroft family in August of 1877, just weeks after the 43 disappeared. The note read, "For your discretion and the containment of memory." That payment? Adjusted for inflation, it equals over $7 million today. That hush fund became the seed money for Ashcroft Mining Freight Company, the empire that launched the family's rise into political power during the early 1900s. And here's the kicker. The current senator's first real estate purchase as a young man was a tract of land right next to the former Beaumont estate. Land that included the old slave quarters, where remnants of ritual bindings and engraved stone rings were discovered in 1988. What did he do with the land? He raised it, built a private retreat. No press, no public access, guarded by ex-military contractors. Locals say strange lights appear on certain moonless nights, that livestock refuse to cross the fence line, that the air goes still when you pass the southern gate. And in a leaked photo from a former staffer, later discredited by mainstream media, you can see the senator standing under a stone archway, holding a goblet carved from what experts say is black coral, a material used by secret societies dating back to pre-colonial ritual worship. When asked about the photo, Ashcroft's office said, "It's clearly a manipulated image meant to smear a man of God." But why has he never once addressed the Beaumont tragedy in over 40 years of public service? Why did he personally block a 1997 bill proposing the excavation of the plantation grounds? Why does his family crest, still displayed in the halls of their estate, contain a serpent devouring 43 stars? Coincidence? Or confession? Because when the truth threatens the powerful, they don't deny it. They erase the question. Beneath the charred remnants of the Beaumont estate lies something far older than the plantation itself. Something not listed in blueprints, not recorded in surveys, and not built by slave labor, because it was already there when Jeremiah Beaumont arrived. In 1972, a flash flood cracked open the earth behind the overgrown smokehouse. What emerged stunned local historians and sent county officials into a quiet panic. A stone shaft nearly 40 feet deep, leading into a tunnel carved by hand, but not by tools known to 19th-century craftsmen. The walls bore strange, spiraled abrasions and glyphs that predate any known European presence in Kentucky. This wasn't a root cellar. This was a catacomb. Over the next few years, unsanctioned explorers and rogue researchers documented over a mile of subterranean corridors, crude alcoves, bone piles, scorch marks. And at the heart, a circular chamber, 18 feet wide, domed with perfectly fitted stone. No mortar, no seams, just cold geometry and silence. Locals called it the Echo Room, because no matter what sound you made, it came back in whispers. Researchers noted that animals refused to enter. Flashlights dimmed prematurely, and in 1981, 2 spelunkers vanished within its depths. Only one was found. His eyes had ruptured. His skin had strange burns. His journal, water-stained but mostly intact, contained a single coherent sentence scrawled repeatedly. "It is still down there." What exactly it is remains debated. But here's what we know from the uncovered Beaumont Ritual Codex, a secret family ledger found in a locked chest beneath a false wall in the main house during a 1954 renovation. The tunnels were used in the Binding Nights, a brotherhood ritual held every 7 years where the chosen would be led by torchlight into the deep and cleansed by contact. One chilling passage reads, "The earth mouth requires 43, 1 fa, or each sin that feeds the yield. The stone sings only when fed. Do not seal it. Do not speak of it. Remember, the ash grows tobacco strong." And this aligns perfectly with the 1877 disappearances, because the last recorded binding night, July 19, 1877, 2 days before the workers vanished. The estate was sealed off the next morning. Official cause: soil depletion. But we know better. The tunnels weren't meant for escape or storage. They were for transporting offerings, silently, without trail, without mercy. And why has no modern excavation ever reached that chamber again? Because in 1994, Senator Ashcroft passed a historical preservation bill, one that forbade disturbing heritage structures of spiritual significance in the region. The law specifically named subterranean networks beneath pre-Civil War estates. Coincidence? Or were they just locking the gate from the inside? In 1938, beneath the crumbling ruins of a chapel in Cornwall, England, a disturbing artifact was unearthed, what scholars would come to call the Ash Mouth Manuscript. It wasn't parchment, it was skin, human skin. Stitched together in uneven strips, the texture yellowed and cracked, inked in a mixture of iron, sulfur and blood. The British Museum locked it away, filed under Codex 119D with strict access restrictions. Most historians never knew it existed, but the few who did were changed by what they read. The manuscript describes a ritual known as the 43 Foldings, a ceremonial offering where selected bodies are arranged in a circular pattern and sacrificed during the 43-day interval between the summer solstice and the rise of the dog star, Sirius. The language is esoteric, layered with distorted Latin invocations, Anglo-Saxon markings, and a cipher that only revealed its third message under infrared light decades later. But even then, the message was unmistakable. The mouth shall open when the count is met, not in anger, in hunger. That exact line is carved into the stone chamber buried beneath the Beaumont estate. The same glyphs, the same phrasing, the same obsession with the number 43. But here's where it gets worse. The final page of the manuscript features a chilling image, a crowned, eyeless serpent rising from the earth into a ring of tobacco leaves, surrounded by kneeling figures with no faces. Beneath it, scrawled in that same spiraled script, "The mouth will feed again." And here's the connection they tried to bury, literally. In 1923, the American copy of this manuscript was quietly purchased at auction in New York by a mysterious buyer named R. L. Ash. That's Roy L. Ashcroft first, the grandfather of the current senator who pushed legislation in the 90s to protect spiritually significant underground structures in Kentucky. Since that auction, the manuscript, IPT, has never been seen again. But fragments of its writing, symbols, phrases, even full stanzas, have appeared on barn walls in tobacco country, etched into animal bones dug up near the Beaumont site, and most disturbingly, branded into the flesh of a missing explorer recovered from those tunnels. The Ash Mouth Manuscript doesn't just document a ritual, it documents a legacy, a blood pact older than nations, a pattern stretching from the old world to the new, from England's fog to Kentucky's black soil. It proves what the Beaumonts never wanted revealed. This wasn't superstition, this was tradition. The number 43 keeps surfacing like a curse stitched into the soil of America's tobacco empire. It wasn't just the Beaumont plantation. In 1865, Halifax County, Virginia, exactly 43 freedmen signed labor contracts with a tobacco farm run by a man named Elijah Brant. Within weeks, all 43 disappeared. Brant claimed they fled north, but local rumor said they were taken into the woods during a moonless night and never seen again. In 1874, Orangeburg, South Carolina, another tobacco operation, another collapse. A barn housing 43 workers caved in during a strange, sudden storm. No rescue effort followed. The owners declared it an act of God and rebuilt on the same land within months. But when a descendant of one of the workers tried to investigate in 1980, he found spiral carvings buried beneath the foundation, identical to those beneath the Beaumont estate. Even more chilling, ledgers from plantations in North Carolina, Mississippi, and Georgia show payments made every 7 years labeled ritual yield insurance. And the amount? Always the same, 43 pounds of silver, or its modern cash equivalent. It was chalked up to superstition, regional folklore. Until an independent researcher, Michael Traynor, traced those transactions to offshore bank accounts linked to the Ashcroft family and 2 others, names tied to the Brotherhood. In 1989, just before he was set to publish his findings, his home was torched. He was declared dead in absentia. No body was ever found. This number, 43, keeps showing up like clockwork. 43 missing workers here, 43 marked stones there. In each case, the result is the same: vanishing people, fertile tobacco, and unexplained wealth that multiplies in the hands of a few families. You want to believe it's coincidence. That's what they want you to think. But when the same symbol, the same number, and the same silence repeats across decades and states, it's not coincidence, it's structure, it's ritual, it's a pattern baked into the foundation of Southern prosperity. A system that feeds itself and buries the bones deep. The truth is that the Beaumont tragedy wasn't an isolated event. It was one node in a web that stretches from plantation to plantation, from ledger to ledger, across time. 43 isn't just a number, it's a price, and someone, somewhere, is still paying it. They found her in 2006. A woman, naked, filthy, wandering the woods 6 miles from the old Beaumont estate. She spoke no English, just strange syllables, whispered over and over like a prayer choked with dirt. Locals called her the Ash Tongue. No ID, no record. Doctors said she hadn't been outside in years. Her skin was pale, cracked, covered in spiral scars. Her fingernails had grown into clawed curves, her eyes sunken, as if light was foreign to her. But it was her back that terrified them most. 43 small branded marks burned in a circle around her spine, each one shaped like the serpent's eye from the Ash Mouth Manuscript. She was taken to a state psychiatric facility. One nurse, against orders, played her an old field recording of tobacco workers chanting in 1870s dialect. The woman began to scream, no, not scream, chant, perfectly matching the rhythm, the tone, the words. This woman, whoever she was, carried a language dead for over a century. One night, she clawed a phrase into her wall using her fingernails. The offering was incomplete. And then she vanished. Surveillance footage glitched. Her door, locked from the outside, was ajar. She was never seen again. Some say she was born in those tunnels, raised as a failsafe. Others believe she was the last of the 43, held alive in stasis, never aging, never dying, until the cycle was disturbed. But this much is clear: her appearance wasn't random. It was a warning. A crack in the seal. Since then, more signs have emerged. Spirals appearing in cornfields, animals found skinned in perfect circles, and a man in Tennessee claiming to have seen a mouth in the ground that breathes. The Brotherhood's grip is loosening. Whatever they sealed down there is stirring, and the ash tongue, whether victim or vessel, marked the beginning of the unraveling. They spent over a century hiding it beneath tobacco welt, political cover, and burned archives. But they made one mistake. They left something unfinished, and now the land remembers. The soil doesn't forgive blood. It absorbs it, learns from it, and when fed enough, it starts to whisper. The real question is, what happens when it finally speaks? The land has begun to rot from the inside. Locals whisper about it, but they won't speak too loud, not after what happened to Sheriff Graham. In 2011, he responded to a call about a collapsed sinkhole near the abandoned Beaumont chapel. The hole wasn't natural, perfectly circular, lined with black stone, and at the bottom, bones. Too many bones. Some cracked, some scorched, all small, child-sized. Graham radioed it in, took photos, and sealed the site, promising a full excavation. 2 days later, he was found dead in his cruiser. No wounds, no drugs, just wide eyes and a dried, brown spiral drawn on the inside of his windshield. On the inside. The report vanished from county records. His wife moved away. But someone leaked the photos, and you can still find them in dark corners of the internet. Femurs packed like firewood, ribs stacked in circular rows. 43 sets? No. That's the thing. There were more. At least 67 distinct skeletons, which means the legend isn't just about one ritual, it's about an ongoing system, a repeating sacrifice, possibly still active and still expanding. Underground, across the south, there are rumors of connected tunnels, deep chambers beneath former plantations, railroads, even government buildings. And the number 43, it might just be the number they offer, not the number they take. The Brotherhood's power was never in politics or land. It was in obedience to something older, darker, more patient. Something fed not by faith, but by pattern, repetition, consistency. Each generation a harvest, each cycle a price. And those who question it, Sheriff Graham, Michael Traynor, the Ash Tongue, they vanish. Silenced. Because if this system is exposed, it doesn't just bring down a family, it brings down the entire foundation of Southern wealth. The truth is buried in dirt, soaked with ritual, and every now and then it rises. A sink, hole here, a whisper there, a mouth that opens in the earth, hungry, ancient, and exact. You were never meant to see the pattern. That was their greatest weapon, invisibility. But now the cracks are widening, the soil is shifting, and the secrets they thought would stay buried are crawling back to the surface bone by bone. The final piece fell into place in 2022, quietly, almost like it didn't want to be found. A demolition crew clearing land near the original Beaumont homestead hit something solid just beneath the surface. At first they thought it was stone, then metal, but when they unearthed the full object, what they found wasn't man-made in any modern sense. It was a door, circular, 12 feet wide, forged from some unidentifiable alloy, cold to the touch despite the summer heat. No hinges, no seams. Just one thing etched deep into its center, a spiral of 43 eyes. No pupil, no iris, just hollow sockets staring outward. The crew was silenced, NDA'd, equipment confiscated. The door was quickly covered and the land reclassified as a protected heritage zone. But a single photo leaked, one frame, blurry but undeniable. Since then, people have gone missing again. Locals, surveyors, a man who claimed to be mapping ley lines that intersected right where the door was found. Every 43 days, something strange happens within a 5-mile radius. Power outages, livestock deaths, dreams shared by people who've never met. Dreams of a black field and a sound like breathing beneath the soil. The Brotherhood has gone silent. No press releases, no public appearances. Even the Ashcrofts have retreated, selling off land, shifting funds to overseas accounts. It's as if they know the cycle is ending, or beginning again. That door, if it even is a door, hasn't opened. Not yet. But it's waiting. And we know now it wasn't built by the Beaumonts. It was worshipped by them, protected, fed. The tobacco empire, the missing workers, the rituals, they were all offerings to keep it sealed, to keep it asleep. But seals erode. Offerings stop. And when the count is incomplete, the mouth begins to stir. You can feel it in the air now, like a pressure deep in your chest when you're near that land. As if tease. The earth is holding its breath. All this time, we thought it was about the past, about uncovering what happened, but it isn't. It's about what's coming, what's always been beneath us, waiting, counting, and soon, very soon, the 43rd breath will be the last before it opens. Now you know the truth they buried in Kentucky's dirt, the missing workers, the sealed door, the ritual that never really stopped. And if your gut feels heavy right now, that's not fear, that's recognition. Because this isn't just a story about the past, it's a blueprint, still running, still feeding, still counting down. The number wasn't random, the symbols weren't a myth, and the Brotherhood, they never left, they just got better at hiding. So the real question is, who's number 43 now?